So we've managed to load image data now. So what would be fun is to try and create an OpenGL texture from that, and then set up a sampler in our fragment shader, assign UV coordinate. It's gonna take a moment to get this right. We're gonna go through this one step at a time. So what we would like to do is we would like to try and gonna move this a little bit around where we generate the texture, because it's gonna be sort of a little bit of a hacked in thing right now. We're gonna work on probably getting that right next week. Right now we're just gonna get it to work and get rendering done. It's always easier just to get stuff to work and then fix it so that it's beautiful later. Assuming that later happens, because if later doesn't happen, you're gonna be sad. Very, very sad. So we're gonna create our texture here. And then we're gonna have, this is where I need my GLES2 quick reference, because I do not, there, texture. So let's have a look at this. So we have texture objects. So we need to generate a textures object. We need to find it. Then once we've done that, we can transfer image data into it with text image, which has a target and then a level and internal formats and sizes and heights and borders and a format, and we need to enable texturing. This is going to be lots of fun. Don't worry, we'll get through it. There's some texture parameters we need to set up, like wrapping and filtering, but that's doable. So what we are going to do, because what we want to do is we just want to set up a static texture and then nothing more than that, and then just use it. So we're not going to do anything weird or nasty with the texture unit. So a couple of things we need to do is we need to GL enable GL texture. And there's a lot of texture things here. I'm trying to remember if it's GL enable GL texture or GL enable GL textures. But the easiest way to find out that is to try and run the code and see if we get an error. So let's try and run the code. We get an error. So, and I can see you guys aren't following the code, but we're going to be Googling anyways. GL enable. So what we want to enable is GL texture 2D. Well, there is a fragment shader active. Now I'm getting... Okay, we're gonna ignore that. We're just gonna try stuff until it works. Best approach ever. So what we're gonna do here is that I am going to just apply a couple of useful methods here. We're gonna have a get width. This is const, by the way. We're gonna have a get height. Const as well, and we're going to have a color pointer, get data, which is also going to be const, because we're going to need to be able to access that in a moment. So from our render here, what we want to do is we want to create a GL uint, which is going to be our texture. Then we're gonna GL gen textures. We're just gonna generate the one and store it in our texture variable. And then we're gonna bind that texture to GL. So when we bind it, we have a target, which is GL texture 2D, because this is a 2D texture. So we bind that, and we bind this texture that we've just generated, and then we transfer our image, which is GL text image 2. So our target is GL texture 2D. We're gonna go for it at level 0, so that's MIP mapping levels. If you're doing MIP maps, so trilinear filtering and stuff like that, we haven't gotten that far yet. Our format is GL RGBA. Our type is GL unsigned byte. I'm missing a border. So after the, okay. I didn't get quite, so after the internal format, we get the width. So that is, we grab our texture T and call get width on it. Then we get the height. Then we have a border of 0. Then we have the format, which again is GL RGB A. Then we give it the type of the data, and then we give it a pointer to the actual data. There we go. I mean, nice and simple, right? So now we should have transferred the data. And bound it. So let's just check that we don't error out on that, and we need to write a couple of methods to support this, because we don't have the get width and get height stuff yet. So texture get width is return this width. Texture get data. Get height is return this height. And texture get data is return this image dot data. Yeah, that's true. I did mean texture colon color. Try that again. Okay, so we need to do const here. And then generally hope that it's able to become a void pointer still. Looks like it's still able to become a void pointer. Great. So no new errors. We're still getting GL error 0. So now we need to learn how to set up a sampler for OpenGL. So we're just going to go and go GLSL sampler 2D. So what we want is this sampler 2D because that matches our GL texture 2D. We don't have a depth texture. So a variable of sampler can only be defined in one of two ways. It can be defined as a function parameter, as a uniform variable. So we want to set it up as a uniform sampler. So what we do is we go for our fragment shader here. And in addition to our varying color, which we're going to ignore in a moment, is we have a uniform sampler 2D. This is going to be our base texture. At some point, there's going to be added a lot of other stuff like normal texture or normal maps or specular maps and stuff like that. But for now, we just have a base texture and that's it. So we can then sample our texture like this. So we are going to go, instead of having our GL frag color like that, we're going to go GL frag color is going to be texture, look up against base texture, and we're going to just use the, we're going to use the input color. We're just going to use the X and Y coordinates of that, because that should give us, I mean, we need 2D coordinates to look up in our texture, and we could do that. Yeah, we're just going to do that mod. Well, we don't actually need to do that mod one. We can just set up texture parameters, which we kind of forgot to do a moment ago. So we're just going to take a look at that. Seem to have run out of music, so we'll just put some more on of that. And we're going to go for something like this. See how this sounds? Great. So we did some rendering over here. We set up our texture to the image here. What we also want to do is we want to go for texture parameters, because what we'd like to do is we'd like to say GL text parameter I. Our target is our GL texture 2D still. The parameter we'd like to set is we'd like to set texture wrapping. So that'll be GL texture wrap S to GL repeat, and we'd like to also set the wrapping for T to repeat. At least that's how I remember you set it up. So let's just try and build all of that and run it. So no errors, but we do get a compiler error here because the frag function is wrong, because I can't still spell color. It's with an R apparently. Who would have known? And then we're complaining about the texture stuff here. No matching overloaded function found. We'll just switch you guys over. So apparently that's not how you use a sampler. Though, uniform flow. Despite the fact that it looks like that over here. So yeah, basic texture access is like that. Weird. We'll just take a look at that in a moment. I'm gonna go back here, switch here, just recompiled with the new shader. So apparently I have no clue how to do this. There is also the TLSL quick reference card here at the bottom. So we have a basic type called a sampler 2D, which we have complete and utter control over. So hopefully somewhere So if we look at this, they do texture 2D. I think that the quick reference card is correct, and we should probably be saying texture 2D here. So let's just clean that and recompile to get the latest shaders into the package. And refresh. Now we're not getting compile errors. We're not either getting anything on the screen because we're no longer coloring based on the coordinates. We're now trying to use a texture or sampler, which we haven't bound for on anything yet. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to figure out how we bind a sampler 2D uniform. So what the call for setting a uniform variable. We're not looking at shaders and programs. We're looking at something like GL get uniform location. So what we'd like to see is something like GL get uniform location, and we'd like to see sampler 2D. Okay, we're gonna go for the guessing approach. So what we are gonna guess is that if we like this up here, where we get the uniform location. So what we want to do is we want to get a uniform location for the base texture. And we have the shader program already compiled, so we're going to call that base texture location. So once we've done that, we can hopefully do something along the lines of GL uniform one integer to base texture location, and then we're just going to give it the texture object, and we'll see what happens. It might work, it might not, nobody really knows, but we're going to give it a shot. Yeah, no, that did not work, and we're getting a nice GL error now. So let's try and see what these guys are doing. So we're just, for the hell of it, I want to make sure stuff doesn't get optimized out because, well, GLSL compilers might be a little bit aggressive. So we're just going to try and see what these things are set to. So we actually, we don't get an error getting that uniform, and it's set to 7, so that sounds reasonable to me. I mean, it's not like 0 or -1 or some other weird stuff. So that's a good sign. Unfortunately, they aren't really showing the part that I want. See, passing multiple textures. So this is exactly what I'm doing. It takes a texture unit. Further, enable GL texture 2D is not needed for textures. Exposures, ugh. Okay, fair enough. So what we do is we say right now base texture is in texture unit 0. And then when we find here, we're gonna say our active texture is texture 0. That'll be interesting. Let's try that out. Yeah, now we're really erroring. Because now we're erroring even earlier. Which kind of worries me. So GL active texture is an enum. So this should probably be GL texture 0. Which, oddly enough, is what they're doing here as well. So I'm just an idiot. See, we got that built. We can refresh. Well, we're still getting an error when we're trying to bind that. Let's just try and see what happens if we bind GL texture 0 to it. Because I kind of like the uniformity of using the same enum value both places. Nope, that is no good. So I activate texture 0. Still uniform 1 integer 0 into that texture. Now I'm kind of puzzled. Try that again. I'm still getting the error. So the question is, what's going wrong here? Because we're almost there. Almost. Let's just, for the hell of it, GL enable GL texture 2D. Verify that problem isn't that for some reason I need to have that enabled. Nope, in fact I fail even more with that set. We'll enable texture. Nope, now we're really failing. So that doesn't look like the problem. So we grab that. We have no errors at this point. We have a base texture location. We set a single uniform pointed. Okay, just for the hell. What happens if we use texture unit 1? Apparently the same thing. Let's look up that GL error. Not that. GL error 1282. Invalid operation for GL uniform 1i with a shader 2D. Oh, not a shader 2D, sampler 2D. Getting late and my brain is not working as well anymore. So we create various things. Let's that as not finds the texture, and he's doing that. So an interesting thing here is that they tend to find the texture afterwards. Let's try and change the order of this. Nope, we've already got the error at this point. I need to enable the texture unit. So they're suggesting I might be forgetting to set magnification and minification filters. Perhaps, but that isn't, I mean, we're not even getting to that point. So minification and magnification, I just want to do. For minification, I want to do GL linear. Actually, for magnification, I want to go for GL nearest. That should make it look very blocky, nicely blocky. That's sort of an aesthetic choice right now. And I still think we should probably do this after setting up the texture. We do it like that. Well, I'm seeing something actually. We're still getting an error. Now the annoying thing is that we're using the X and Y for the sampling, so I can't really see what's going on. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to change our fragment shader to use the X and the Z. so that's what we're sort of seeing in screen space? Or is it, no, I want XY sounds good. I should be seeing something nicely. It looks like we're sort of getting something now. But I'm still worried about the GL error. Very worried. I mean, that doesn't seem right. So I'm getting a uniform location. Looking for sampler 2D and base texture, and I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying get the uniform location in this shader program of base texture. And then set it to 0. That's all I'm asking to do. So, why is that not working? Has only been the question for the last half an hour or so. Finding textures to samplers. Oh, am I using the program at this time? I might not actually have the program active. I'm pretty sure I don't have the program active. Let's just quickly use the program so that we have the program active. And now there's no error. Texture is still a little bit on the dodgy side. I mean, we can kind of see something going on here. Now the question is, are we loading it wrong? Or is there something else going on here? Because there is a little bit of color difference here if I get really up close and personal. And I actually put it in a mode where you guys can see it as well. You can sort of see that there's something going on here, a little bit of color. But it's definitely not the texture we did at the beginning after the break. So we're gonna have to take a look at that. So let's see what's going on here. So we have a texture. Now it could possibly be that we might not have the size that we expect we have, or something weird with that vector. So let's just try and see here. Texture. I want to do a quick little static assert that the size of color is 4. Texture color. So the size of that has to be 4 or something will go wrong. So it is 4. That's a good thing. I think we might want to just, to be sure, make a structure color and then just ourselves say that it's uint8 of R, G, C, and alpha. So that means our assignment here no longer works, but we should be able to do thusly instead. same thing. I mean, it looks stretched along the Z direction, which I would expect, but it also looks stretched along X, which I would not expect. So I think we need to take a look maybe at the texture format and see if we're reading it right, because there were some assumptions here. So each sample in the raster has, yeah, that's just different, so it should be the same in that sense. So when we're reading it, get our size and width and height, we resize to that. Then we run across, we take y times width plus x, which should be correct. So like x will run from 0 to 128, and since width is, to 127, and since width is 128, when y becomes 1, we'll be indexing at 128, and then we'll go from 128 to 255, and then we'll go 256 to 383, and so on. So that seems good. I think what we're going to do is we're going to sort of make a more clear version of the texture, and then we are going to try and see if that doesn't help. Makes it a little bit more obvious what's going wrong. So what we're going to do is we're just going to copy this layer. We're going to promote it to a new layer. At 100% opacity, we're going to try and save that out as the ASCII encoding, and then we're going to try and switch back here, give that another go. Once I just find that, there we go. Now we need to clean it, and so we get that new texture incorporated. So we're going to build all of that. I mean, you can clearly see there is a texture, and we're texturing it sort of along the right direction, but the data is definitely messed up. This is not what it's supposed to look like. But I mean, we're sampling it the way we want to, because we're just reusing sort of the x, y coordinates right now. And then, of course, whenever the Z changes, you're going to be using the same texture along an entire Z. So, but we'll get to that when we introduce texture coordinates. But that's only going to be once the texture actually works. And I suspect that right now what's going wrong is that we're reading it very, very badly. So I want to try and read these. Maybe we should read these as integers. Maybe it's trying to do something weird as characters instead, reading individual bytes. Yeah, we're getting non-constant expression cannot be narrowed. So we're just going to have to narrow them by hand, I guess. So this is we want to do a static cast to an unsigned 8-bit integer here. See if that works better. Yeah, it does. So we'll take a look at the much better. So we just didn't manage to read the texturing correctly. But now we have texturing with our wonderful non-tileable stone texture. So looking at the world's ugliest stone sphere, that's where we're going to call it. for this week. Next week, hopefully, we'll be able to get a nicer texture. We'll add UV coordinates at least. Maybe add some lighting to it. But we're actually slowly but surely getting somewhere with this. So, until next week, thank you all for coming out, and hope to see you again next week.